Speaker.
Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Minister's very full contribution in the third reading debate. This is significant legislation, and this is an important initiative for the New Zealand environment. It is correct that many people have put a lot of hard work into the constitution of the Environmental Protection Authority, and in particular the work done at the Select Committee involved careful consideration of public submissions, of which there were a number of excellent ones, and I think careful thought by members of the committee around the content of the legislation. So while it's helpful, I think, to have had a fulsome contribution in the third reading debate from the mover of the legislation, it is a shame that the committee stages proceeded the way they did. I've had a look at the record of what happened in the committee stages. There was a 3-hour and 45-minute debate over 2 days. Now, we heard from only 5 members of the government during that entire debate, and I include in those contributions the Minister himself on a short call and the Māori Party member Rahui Kātanei. And it may have been 2 short calls, the Minister's reminding me. Even if that's the case, it's really insufficient. We had 1 call from the Chair of the Select Committee. Now, sir, I'm mentioning this because it's important, I think, for the record to reflect that at the committee stages there were a number of very significant matters dealt with. First of all, there had been significant criticism from submitters and from the Labour opposition that there was a confusing level of mandate conferred upon the EPA by the legislation concerning its obligations around engagement with iwi. In response to that criticism, we saw at the committee stages a supplementary order paper in the name of Rahui Kātanei. Clearly it had been drafted by the officials in close consultation with the Minister. That SOP, sir, should have come to the Select Committee, and it should have been the subject of proper consideration by the members of the committee. That didn't happen. Instead, it was tabled, as it were, at the last minute in committee. As I said, we had 1 5-minute speech from Ms Kātanei, the sponsor of the supplementary order paper. It was touched on in a brief response by the Minister, and that's it as far as the government's concerned. Now, what? And the government's, one of the government's other coalition partners has just revealed that there was no discussion with it, although I do note that its members voted for the treaty clause on this occasion. So, Mr Boscawen, no, that's not right. And what this shows, what this confusion shows, is just how unsatisfactory the process around that SOP in particular was concerned. Now, on the issue of engagement with iwi, this is the position that now obtains in respect of New Zealand's environment legislation. There are 4 different types of treaty clause that exist in different pieces of environmental legislation. They provide different things. There is an overarching treaty clause now in the Environmental Protection Bill as it currently stands, Act as it's probably about to become. In respect of many of the EPA's functions, there is no obligation to deal with the treaty or its principles. This is the confusing position that has been created by the supplementary order paper that has been moved and voted upon successfully in the committee stages. This is the mess that now exists in respect of the EPA's obligations to consult with iwi. And if the matter had gone to the Select Committee, if the Minister had had the courtesy to refer it to the Select Committee, if the Māori Party had actually twigged to the fact that there was no treaty clause in the original EPA bill and had asked that it be inserted prior to the Select Committee, then we could have avoided all this confusion. But, sir, as it is, this is the level of parliamentary procedure, the level of impropriety procedurally that we've been subjected to by this Minister on a key matter as far as the EPA's ongoing powers are concerned. So the other reason why it's concerning that we had such a scant level of contribution from government members in the committee stages is that the Minister moved a very significant procedural supplementary order paper during those stages. It divided the legislation into 6 separate bills, and it made changes to the way in which the legislation comes into effect. I would have thought the committee and the House deserved the courtesy of some explanation of those changes from the Minister. The Minister, when it suits him, likes to talk about procedure. But often, so often, his actions do not measure up to the standard that he sets himself, and sadly, again, this is one of those occasions. Sir, just some other interesting statistics. We had 20 minutes, as I said, of calls from government members, and I include in that category Rahui Kātane and the Minister himself, as well as the Chair of the Select Committee. We had, I think, some 20 minutes of calls from the Green Party, and there were some excellent contributions during those calls. The rest of the 3-hour committee stages consisted of calls from the Labour Party, and despite what the Minister had to say about one of those calls, I'd just like to put on record for the House that it was the Labour opposition that bore the brunt of the job that is to be undertaken by the Committee of the Whole, scrutiny of the legislation for all members in the House. So I make no apology for that, but I do deplore the fact that there was such a scant contribution on such a key piece of legislation from government members. If it's so important, if the so-called blue-green agenda is so compelling, we might have thought we might have heard more about it. Sir, there are other tokens of disregard for the environment in this legislation, and the Minister touched on some of them. The first and most compelling relates to the objectives of the Environmental Protection Authority. Now, the Minister said this is just a matter of timing. He fully intends to bring more legislation to the House later in the year. The question arises, why do it that way, Minister? Why do it in such a piecemeal fashion? This was your opportunity to bring very good and comprehensive legislation to the House, particularly at a time when there's public disquiet around offshore drilling and exploration. You know, Minister, that that's the case. You had a perfect opportunity to create a comprehensive environmental safety regulator here, particularly in respect of that offshore drilling activity, where people are concerned about the lack of safety requirements and very, very concerned about the lack of any consultation with communities affected, particularly iwi. This legislation could have reconciled those problems, but you weren't able to bring comprehensive legislation to the House on the matter. And there are many other environmental functions that remain outside the purview of the EPA. That should have been remedied right from the start. Then there's, of course, the issue of the fact that the EPA doesn't actually carry any obligation to protect the environment. Nowhere in the objectives of this bill is there a statement around the government's desire that it be an environmental protector. Well, talk about hamstringing an organisation right from the start. People want to see strong, independent environmental regulation from the centre, and what they have in this bill and in this authority, unfortunately, sir, is a damp squib because of the absence of that overarching requirement that this actually be an entity that looks after the natural environment. The other concern, sir, that's been voiced time and time again relates to the independence of the authority. This bill involves moving the IRMA powers much closer to the Minister. Now, he may well be right about individual cases of direction, but the problem, as I tried to point out in the committee stages, is the whole tenor of this legislation basically is one of ministerial control and direction rather than independence. That's the default position in this legislation. It's not the way that a proper environmental regulator should have been set up. Sir, Labor created the Ministry for the Environment in 1986 because we believed in the fundamental importance of strong environmental regulation and leadership by the government. We don't believe, as the Minister has said so many times, that environmental, social and economic goals are competitive. They should be complementary. This was a great opportunity, sir, but because of the deficiencies I've identified, it's a missed one.
Chris Okenvold.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a privilege